The Palau archipelago rests in the vastness of the western Pacific Ocean, situated approximately 550 miles or 890 kilometers east of the Philippines. This chain of islands, a blend of volcanic and coral formations, is shielded by an extensive barrier reef that nearly encircles the entire area. It is within this serene, natural environment that one of the most brutal battles of the Pacific War unfolded, a conflict that quickly defied all predictions and became synonymous with endurance and extreme sacrifice. The island of Peleliu, a relatively small platform of coralline material spanning just 6.56 square miles, was designated as the focal point for a fierce engagement. The fighting involved the United States Marine 1st Division, the U.S. Army 81st Infantry Division, and the Imperial Japanese Forces. The operation to secure this territory, codenamed Operation Stalemate II, began on September 15, 1944, and stretched unexpectedly until November 27, 1944. The initial assessment suggested the island would be secured in just a few days. Instead, the fight lasted an agonizing 74 days, etching the name Peleliu into history as a site of devastating attrition. The ultimate goal of Operation Stalemate II was strategic, to prevent the Japanese forces stationed there from attacking the western flank of U.S. Army General Douglas MacArthur's advance as he worked toward the liberation of the Philippines. The cost of this engagement was extraordinarily high, a stark measure of the ferocity of the defense mounted by the Japanese. When the island was finally declared secure, the American forces had suffered an exceedingly high casualty rate. U.S. casualties included almost 1,800 killed in action, KIA, and more than 8,000 wounded or missing. The Japanese forces, utilizing an incredibly strong defensive network, suffered over 10,000 killed in action. This battle stands as a profound example of tactical victory achieved at immense human expense, transforming a predicted short campaign into one of the most prolonged and painful assaults of the war. The sheer scale of loss underscores why the personal narratives of those who survived the maelstrom offer crucial insight into the realities of modern combat. Background and theory of the operation. The history of the Palau Islands is marked by shifts in geopolitical control before the advent of the Second World War. Following Spain's defeat in the Spanish-American War in 1898, Palau was sold to Germany in 1899. Control later transitioned to Japan in 1914. By 1944, when American forces prepared their invasion, only two islands, Peleliu and Angar, were slated for occupation by the Americans. Koror, the capital of Palau, remained under Japanese control until the very end of World War II. The Japanese command understood the strategic importance of Palau and had meticulously transformed the island into a formidable defensive fortress. The geography itself offered a unique advantage to the defenders. Peleliu was a maze of natural and man-made obstacles, defined by rocky ramparts, steep hills, jagged crags, thick jungles, and most importantly, an extensive subterranean network. The Japanese engineered a system featuring over 500 caves and interconnected tunnels, enabling their soldiers to move effectively and remain undetected between different combat sectors. This sophisticated defense mechanism ensured that simply capturing the surface of the island would not secure it. The fighting would have to be driven underground, bunker by bunker. The operational planning for the invasion was highly complex, acknowledging the inherent difficulties presented by the coral geography and the prepared defenses. Success hinged heavily on the preparatory work conducted by specialized naval units, specifically the Navy Underwater Demolition Teams, or UDTs, often referred to as frogmen. Naval planning recognized that the entire invasion effort would fail unless the amphibious craft could successfully traverse the surrounding waters, bypass mines, navigate anti-boat obstacles made of concrete, and avoid treacherous coral heads and boulders to land troops ashore. Consequently, UDT reconnaissance became an integral, non-negotiable component of all planning stages.
UDT-10 executed the initial scouting mission of the invasion beaches in August 1944, utilizing the USS Burfish. Their intelligence revealed significant defensive preparations. The beaches were protected by concrete tetrahedrons, which are pyramidal anti-vehicle obstacles. There were also double rows of wooden posts extending 75 yards from the shoreline. Furthermore, the approaches were laced with barbed wire and horned mines. The horned mines, specifically the J-13 type, were particularly dangerous due to their extreme instability. Critically, the reconnaissance also found that in some areas the surrounding reef was barely covered, having only 2 feet of water at low tide. Crossing this reef barrier posed a massive logistical and physical challenge for landing vessels. Just 3 days prior to D-Day, UDT-6 and 7 were deployed. Their mission was twofold: to destroy the immediate obstacles and, more critically, to use explosives to blast wide, usable ramps through the dense coral reef. This dangerous assignment was carried out in broad daylight. The unarmed swimmers faced constant threat, not only from intermittent sniper fire and machine gun bursts originating from the shore, but also from naval fire support flying overhead from offshore ships. On the night immediately preceding the assault, the UDTs returned. This time, they crawled ashore stealthily to demolish additional obstacles, including rock cribs and concrete cubes, and to set buoys that would mark the newly cleared, blasted passageways across the reef for the assault waves. The amphibious assault plan itself was a masterpiece of logistical coordination, described by Tony L. Carell as involving 5 imaginary parallel lines staged offshore. These lines determined where various elements of the task force would position themselves before the final push toward the island. The farthest line, located 18,000 yards out, was reserved for the large ships and troop transports. The next staging point was for the LSTs, or landing ship transports. These LSTs carried the Specialized Landing Vehicle Tract, LVTs, sometimes called Amtraks, within their cavernous holds, preparing them for deployment. At 6,000 yards from shore, the LSTs opened their bow doors and the smaller LVTs, essential for crossing the reef, disembarked. The fourth line, 4,000 yards from the beach, represented a 30-minute travel time to the shore. This was designated as the rendezvous line, where all the assault waves had to form up into groups, organizing themselves opposite their specific, designated beaches. The fifth and final staging line before the reef lay 2,000 yards out, representing just 15 minutes of travel time to the shore. This line served as the transfer point, where the Amtraks, having completed their mission of carrying the initial assault waves, would return. At the same time, the next groups of men and essential supplies would transfer from small boats into the waiting Amtraks. Once the troop-carrying amphibious fleet reached the last marker, 1,000 yards from the island, they were fully committed and operating independently, charged with crossing the reef and reaching the shore. The careful management of this small fleet at each of the 5 lines was maintained by submarine chasers, patrol craft, and Higgins boats. These vessels were vital for hoisting signaling flags, ensuring the waves formed correctly, and maintaining constant radio communication across the complex operation. Leading the initial waves of personnel were armored LVT-As, which functioned as amphibian tanks. These specialized vehicles were armed with machine guns and howitzers. Their crucial mission was to neutralize the immediate beach defenses, thus providing essential support for the ensuing troop landings. Further offshore, positioned at the 1,000-yard line, were LCI-G landing craft infantry gunboats. These gunboats were heavily armed with rockets and systematically raked the defensive positions on the island. They delivered continuous covering fire, protecting the advancing LVT-As. Concurrently, the air and sea bombardment continued, with naval gunfire pummeling the island and aircraft executing bombing and strafing runs. The successful landing was, by necessity, a complex maneuver that demanded exceptionally precise timing and coordination from all contributing units. Following days of concentrated, heavy U.S. naval and aerial bombardment designed to soften the defenses, the 1st Marine Division began the actual landing. The assault commenced at 8:30 military time on September 15, 1944. The invasion was meticulously segmented across specific beachheads. The 1st Marine Regiment landed on beaches White 1 and White 2. The 5th Marine Regiment established its presence on beaches Orange 1 and Orange 2. Finally, the 7th Marine Regiment landed on Beach Orange 3. The sight of the LVTs moving toward the beaches, captured by a plane from the USS Honolulu CL-48, illustrated the vast scale of the maneuver. Despite the heavy bombardment preceding the landing, the Japanese defenses proved resilient and deadly. The enemy forces immediately unleashed machine gun fire onto the beaches. However, the commitment to the mission was absolute, exemplified by the rapid capture of the airfield located on the south part of Peleliu. This critical objective was secured within the first week of fighting. The Marines swiftly put the captured field to use, utilizing F-4U Corsair fighter planes to fly close air support missions. These missions were conducted so close to the ongoing action that pilots sometimes didn't even raise their landing gear while airborne. A single operational mission, or sortie, could be executed in just 30 minutes from the moment of takeoff to landing, highlighting the intense, proximate nature of the combat. As the Marines pushed inland, the unforgiving geography of the Brogel Mountain and its ridgelines presented a new, deeply entrenched threat. This sector became particularly dangerous for the Marines engaged in close combat. The sector was characterized by narrow valleys, sharp peaks, deep sinkholes, and steep hills composed of hard coral. This hard coral surface severely impeded the ability of the troops to dig defensive foxholes, increasing their exposure to enemy fire. This sector of relentless fighting on Peleliu quickly earned a notorious nickname, Bloody Nose Ridge, a testament to the severe toll it took in men killed in action and wounded.
Main analysis: the human cost and survivor narratives. The Battle of Peleliu, designed as a quick strike, devolved into a protracted grinding struggle that forced men to face extremes of physical environment, sophisticated enemy defense, and profound psychological stress. The stories of 3 men who survived, a Marine infantryman, a Navy corpsman, and a Navy Seabee, provide crucial practical insight into the different facets of the island's trauma and the broader Operation Stalemate II. The experience of the infantry. Joe W. Clapper. Joe W. Clapper served with the 1st Marine Division. Born in Indiana in 1924, his family later moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan. After completing high school in June 1942, he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. Following his training in California, he shipped out to Melbourne, Australia as a replacement. He was assigned to K Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, part of the 1st Marine Division. While in Melbourne, he, like many World War II U.S. service members, found the Australians to be friendly, and the Marines conducted training exercises at the local cricket grounds. Clapper's journey to Peleliu involved previous combat experience. From Melbourne, the 1st Marines moved to Goodenough Island, off the coast of New Guinea. On December 26, 1943, they saw action at Cape Gloucester, New Britain. This action was part of Operation Cartwheel, a major Allied operation in the Pacific aimed at neutralizing the major Japanese base at Rabaul, New Britain. In April 1944, the 1st Marine Division rotated out of New Britain and traveled to Pavuvu Island, located in the Russell Islands chain, northwest of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. The purpose of this movement was rest and rigorous training in preparation for the upcoming assault on Peleliu. The morning of the Peleliu invasion, September 15, 1944, was marked by the intensity of preparation. Reveille, the military wake-up call, sounded at 1 a.m. That morning, the men were served steak and eggs, a traditional large meal before major operations. Then began the arduous and complex transfer process from the large ships to the smaller landing craft, leading toward the beaches. Joe Clapper landed on White Beach as part of the very first assault wave. The landing was instantly met with overwhelming hostility. Japanese machine gun fire fiercely raked the beach, causing sand to fly everywhere. Clapper vividly described the experience, stating it was like trying to run between raindrops, capturing the sheer density and impossibility of avoiding the incoming fire. Clapper's survival depended not just on luck, but on the actions of his fellow Marines. Near the close of the first day, his life was saved by a young Marine he called Junior. It was later discovered that Junior, whose exact name in the interview was noted as J.M. Morsey from Harlan County, Kentucky, was only 15 years old. Due to incomplete paperwork, Junior had gone on the operation despite being underage. Junior yelled a crucial warning. "Look out, Joe, a Jap." Clapper recalled that upon turning after the warning, he found himself looking directly into the rifle barrel of a Japanese soldier. Junior acted instantly, killing the soldier and saving Clapper's life. Years later, Clapper expressed profound gratitude that this young man, who legally should not have been present, had secured his survival. The horror continued unabated. On the 2nd day of the battle, Clapper witnessed the death of his good friend, Fortune Orlando Rosencrantz, the 3rd, nicknamed Rosie, from Pennsylvania. Rosie was fatally shot in the chest, with the force of the bullet causing his lung to blow out his back. Clapper carried that horrific image of Rosie's death with him long after the war concluded. Later that same day, Clapper himself was struck. A bullet hit him in the upper left chest area. A U.S. Navy corpsman quickly provided aid, placing a bandage on the wound, and Clapper was evacuated to the beach. From there, he was transferred to a hospital ship located offshore. The scale of the carnage was inescapable. Clapper noted in his interview that the beach was literally carpeted with dead Marines awaiting evacuation or burial. Although wounded at Peleliu, Clapper returned to service. His next major engagement was the Battle of Okinawa, which spanned from April 1st to June 22, 1945.
By the end of the war, Joe Clapper had accumulated 3 Purple Hearts, one for the wound sustained at Peleliu, and 2 more for injuries received during the intense fighting on Okinawa, one from shrapnel and the other from Japanese machine gun fire. Joe W. Clapper passed away in 2019.
The burden of care, John W. Bailey, Jr., Corpsman. John W. Bailey, Jr. served a crucial role as a U.S. Navy corpsman attached to the 1st Marine Division. His oral history, recorded in 2010, provided a unique and often agonizing perspective on the battle, focusing on the immediate physical and psychological toll on the troops. Born in Missouri in 1925, Bailey moved to Santa Paula, California at the age of 9. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, spurred his desire to join the U.S. Navy. At just 17 and a half years old, John had to convince his father to sign the necessary paperwork, permitting him to enlist while still under the military's required minimum age. He recalled his father's deeply felt comment at the time, "I feel just like I'm signing your death warrant," a prophetic expression of the risks inherent in his service. John enlisted on January 7, 1943, and was selected for specialized medical training to become a U.S. Navy corpsman. The Marine Corps does not maintain its own medical component, relying instead on the medical resources provided by the U.S. Navy. This integration meant that corpsmen like Bailey lived and fought side by side with the Marines, sharing the same risks. In September 1943, Bailey shipped out of San Diego, eventually arriving at the island of New Caledonia, which was home to a U.S. Marine Replacement Battalion. New Caledonia is located approximately 750 miles, or 1,210 kilometers east of Australia. Bailey later sailed to Australia, where he was formally assigned to the 1st Marine Division. After the 1st Marines concluded operations in New Britain, they moved to Pavuvu Island, the same staging area Joe Clapper utilized. Pavuvu, a setting for necessary rest and training, presented its own unique challenges. The island, which featured a large coconut plantation, had been abandoned by its native population when the war reached the area. The Marines were tasked with constructing their own base and island infrastructure, but they quickly encountered a different kind of enemy: relentless rats and aggressive land crabs. Bailey noted that sleeping was nearly impossible due to the rats and crabs running through the tents and over the inhabitants, sometimes even nibbling on the Marines' ears. This led to Marines organizing contests to see who could kill the highest number of rats, and the winner receiving a bottle of alcohol. Amusingly, tales circulated that Marines would sometimes steal dead rats from one another to ensure they won the prize. The island became so notorious that in Marine language, Pavuvu quickly evolved into a 6-letter curse word. Despite the harsh conditions, Pavuvu provided one moment of cultural relief. The legendary comedian Bob Hope, representing the U.S. service organizations, performed a show for the Marines in August 1944. Following this period, the 1st Marines departed for Peleliu, arriving on September 15, 1944. Corpsman John Bailey landed on White Beach that day, attached to the 1st Marine Regiment, led by the famous Marine Colonel J.S.T. Puller. When asked about his time on Peleliu, Bailey described his tenure vividly as 45 days and 1,000 nights, emphasizing the constant psychological pressure and lack of restful sleep. He categorized the Battle of Peleliu as the horror of all battles. Bailey's memories focused heavily on the unique environmental savagery of the conflict. The heat was extreme, often reaching an estimated 115 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The pre-landing bombing and sustained combat had decimated most of the natural foliage and trees, eliminating potential shade, cover, and concealment vital for fighting men. Dehydration became a critical and widespread issue. To make matters worse, some of the water brought ashore had been stored in metal barrels previously used for gasoline, rendering the essential fluid undrinkable. The combination of heat and humidity led to severe sunburn and blisters, often causing men's eyes to swell shut. Beyond the heat, the very ground posed a lethal threat. Peleliu was a coral island, and when artillery barrages and bombs struck the ground, sharp patches of coral flew through the air as deadly shards. Bailey witnessed men dying from these flying fragments. When he was not actively treating the wounded Marines in the field, Bailey was assigned to the incredibly difficult duty of working with the Graves Registration Service units. This unit was responsible for finding, identifying, and burying the dead in a temporary cemetery constructed on the island. Bailey stressed the profound importance of identifying every body so that the families of the fallen Marines could know precisely what had happened to their loved ones. The intensity of the fighting meant that the gathering of dead Marines could not begin until 3 to 4 days after the battle commenced. This delay, combined with the extreme tropical climate, was disastrous. Bodies often became unrecoverable due to rapid decomposition after just 2 days.
Adding to the overwhelming physical hardship was the ubiquitous and inescapable sensory assault. Bailey spoke of the terrible smell of the island. This odor was a combination of American and Japanese dead bodies, and the island's use as what he grimly called one big toilet. This smell was so pervasive that Marine pilots flying overhead confirmed that they could actually smell the island from the air. In his book, Islands of Death, Islands of Victory, published in 2002, Bailey encapsulated the trauma of Peleliu with a famous saying. There was a saying, a Marine who had served on Peleliu died and went to heaven. When St. Peter opened the gate, the Marine saluted and said, "Another Marine reporting, sir. I have already served my time in hell." Of such a place was Peleliu. After the ordeal on Peleliu, the 1st Marine Division returned to Pavuvu to recover and begin training for the impending Battle of Okinawa. John Bailey passed away in 2020. The Builders Who Fought, William Taylor Stitt, Seabee. William Taylor Stitt, known as Taylor, offered yet another dimension to the Peleliu narrative, that of the supporting construction and maintenance troops. Taylor served as a Seabee, attached to Construction Maintenance Battalion Unit No. 571. The Seabees, a contraction of Construction Battalion, CB, were a critical, specialized force established by the Navy in 1942. Their mottos, "We build, we fight," and "Can do," perfectly summarized their dual mission. The Seabees were tasked with building and maintaining essential military infrastructure globally across all theaters of war. Their work was highly varied, involving the construction of bases and airfields, paving roadways, and myriad other construction projects. Importantly, their duties also extended to the somber task of war, constructing caskets and making crosses and Star of David grave markers for the temporary cemeteries, underscoring their presence at the sharpest edge of combat logistics. During WWII, the Seabees constructed over 400 bases. The history of the Seabees is punctuated by numerous acts of bravery and vital construction under fire. Their activities spanned the globe, including outfitting a seaplane base in the Galapagos Islands, Ecuador, and constructing military facilities in Casablanca, Morocco, after landing with American forces during Operation Torch in November 1942. In Europe, on D-Day, June 6, 1944, Seabees went ashore with the U.S. Army engineers at Normandy, tasked with destroying German barriers and obstacles. They later assisted U.S. General George S. Patton's troops in crossing the Rhine River at Oppenheim, Germany in March 1945. One Seabee crew even ferried Prime Minister Churchill across the Rhine for an inspection tour. In the Pacific, the first Seabee crew to build under actual combat conditions rebuilt a crucial airfield, now known as Henderson Field, on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. Perhaps most critically, at Tinian Island, after the USS Indianapolis arrived carrying the components for the first atomic bomb, the Seabees helped unload and store these materials. It was from Tinian's North Field, which the Seabees themselves had built, that the B-29 superfortress Enola Gay took off on August 6, 1945, to drop the bomb on Hiroshima. The commitment of the Seabees came at a high cost, proving they indeed fought as well as they built. They earned 33 Silver Stars and 5 Navy Crosses. 18 officers and 272 enlisted men were killed in action. Furthermore, construction accidents resulted in more than 500 Seabee deaths during the war. Taylor Stitt, born in Williamsville, Illinois in 1915, enlisted in the Seabees in August 1943. After training in the U.S., his unit, Construction Maintenance Battalion Unit No. 571, traveled through the Panama Canal from Gulfport, Mississippi, and landed on Bonica, part of the Russell Islands. They were based there until they departed for Peleliu in September 1944. Due to the intense initial combat, heavy bombing, strafing, and the pitched battle ongoing between the Marines and the Japanese, the Seabees did not land until about 5 days after the initial fighting began. Once ashore, they immediately set to work on their primary tasks: repairing the damaged airstrips, working on necessary roadways, repairing a heavily battered Japanese administration building for Marine use, constructing ammunition storage huts, and general infrastructure support for the troops. Despite arriving after the initial assault, the island was far from secure, and danger remained constant. Japanese snipers were active across Peleliu. Bailey spoke of an instance while driving a weapons carrier. Upon reaching his destination, he noticed a sniper bullet embedded in the clock of the vehicle, a silent testament to how narrowly he had escaped harm.
Construction Maintenance Battalion Unit Number 571 had 16 huts on the island. Taylor Stitt was housed in Hut Number 1, which served as their base of operations. They remained stationed on Peleliu until the end of WWII. After the conclusion of the war, Taylor and his friend, Harold Groh from Minnesota, managed to secure a unique form of transportation. They hitched a ride on the plane carrying a USO troop that had recently performed a show on Peleliu. This ride took them as far as Honolulu, in the territory of Hawaii. Unable to find another flight back to the U.S. mainland, Taylor and Harold completed their journey by sailing back to California aboard the famous battleship, the USS Missouri. Taylor also carried a poignant memory related to the shared human experience of war. While on Peleliu, he encountered a Marine friend named George from his hometown of Springfield. George shared a wartime vow with Taylor: "If I live through the war, I'm going to invent a coffee machine." This vow of survival and return to normal life led to a tangible legacy. In 1957, George R. Bunn founded the Bunn-O-Matic Corporation. Taylor Stitt passed away in 2020.
Taylor Stitt passed away in 2012.
Results and discussion: The Echoes of Hell. The Battle of Peleliu stands as a compelling and painful case study in the dynamics of amphibious warfare against a deeply entrenched, non-surrendering defense. The American victory, secured after 74 days, came at a staggering cost that permanently marked the consciousness of the U.S. military and the nation. The prediction that the fighting would last only a few days dramatically miscalculated the effectiveness of the Japanese's cave and tunnel defensive system and the resolve of the defenders. The resulting casualty rates, over 9,800 American casualties and over 10,000 Japanese dead, demonstrate that Peleliu was, in many ways, a Pyrrhic victory. The operational success was undeniably dependent on the specialized units that prepared the path. The reconnaissance and demolition work performed by the Navy UDTs were foundational, neutralizing mines and blasting ramps through the coral reef under heavy fire. Had the UDTs failed to clear these complex obstacles, the entire invasion fleet risked being trapped or destroyed before reaching the shore. The precision involved in staging the 5 waves of the amphibious assault, coordinating naval and air bombardment with the advance of armored amphibian tanks, LVTAs, and gunboats, LCIGs, highlights the sophisticated logistical planning required for Pacific campaigns. However, the reality faced by the men who landed, like Joe Clapper and John Bailey, transcended tactical planning. Clapper's memory of facing machine gun fire as running between raindrops perfectly captures the sheer saturation of the combat zone. The struggle quickly moved from the beaches to the nightmarish terrain of Ummerbrogel Mountain and Bloody Nose Ridge. This natural fortress, characterized by steep coral and sinkholes, denied the Marines the basic defense of a foxhole, forcing continuous exposed engagement against an enemy hidden in over 500 interconnected tunnels and caves. The accounts of Corpsman John Bailey reveal the profound non-combat stressors that amplified the horror. The extreme heat, reaching 115 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, combined with severe dehydration from undrinkable water, turned the environment itself into a weapon. The physical geography was actively hostile, with flying shards of coral acting like deadly shrapnel when the ground was struck by ordnance. Bailey's dual role as combat medic and a member of the Graves Registration Service exposed him to the psychological maximum of the battle. The inability to retrieve bodies for days, leading to irreversible decomposition in the tropical heat, compounded the trauma. The overwhelming smell, a combination of the dead, decay, and poor battlefield sanitation, was so intense that it defined the island, marking it as a truly unique place of suffering. His reflection that Peleliu was worse than hell encapsulates the utter degradation of the human experience there. The presence of the Seabees, represented by William Taylor Stitt, illustrates the essential yet often overlooked role of military construction units in facilitating sustained combat operations. Their ability to build and fight meant that infrastructure critical for victory, like repairing airstrips for close air support and maintaining roads for supply lines, was established under continuous threat, including sniper fire. Stitt's close call with the bullet embedded in his weapons carrier clock is a chilling reminder that no role on Peleliu was safe from the constant danger. The psychological weight of the battle was famously captured by artist Tom Lee, who served on Peleliu as a combat correspondent with the 1st Marine Division in 1944. Lee's painting, titled 2,000-Yard Stare, became an iconic image expressing the vacant, shell-shocked expression of the combat fatigue he witnessed firsthand, powerfully symbolizing the psychological toll taken on those who endured the long, protracted fight. The battle's legacy is not just one of tragedy but also one of extraordinary heroism. Despite the brutal conditions and tactical errors in predicting the enemy's defense, the courage displayed by the U.S. forces was recognized at the highest level. 8 Marines received the Medal of Honor for their actions during the Battle of Peleliu. This list includes Captain Everett P. Pope and First Lieutenant Carlton Rowe. Tragically, half of these honors were awarded posthumously. Corporal Lewis K. Bousel, Private First Class Richard Krause, Private First Class John D. New, Private First Class Wesley Phelps, and Private First Class Charles H. Roan. Their sacrifices underscore the intensity of the fighting required to breach the Japanese fortress. The island remains a tangible link to this traumatic history. Peleliu is officially listed on the U.S. National Register of Historic Places and has been designated a U.S. National Historic Landmark. This designation ensures that the battlefield and its physical remnants are preserved as a solemn memorial to the events that unfolded there. The continuation of the conversation about Peleliu is maintained through vital historical resources. The oral history interviews of survivors like Joe Clapper, John Bailey, and Taylor Stitt are preserved in the archives of the National Museum of the Pacific War, ensuring their first-hand accounts and personal traumas are available for future generations to learn from and reflect upon.
Conclusion. The battle for Peleliu Island, Operation Stalemate II, remains a critical, challenging, and often controversial chapter in the history of the Pacific War. What began as a strategically necessary, anticipated short engagement to protect General MacArthur's flank in the Philippines morphed into a 74-day trial of strength, endurance, and will against an enemy who had turned a small coral island into a subterranean killing ground. The narrative of Peleliu is necessarily fragmented across the experiences of different soldiers. The Marine infantryman Joe Clapper faced the immediate terror of the beach landing and the close personal loss of friends in combat, surviving multiple wounds in the process. The Navy Corpsman John Bailey bore the immense psychological burden of tending to the wounded and identifying the dead, struggling against the pervasive physical horrors of heat, dehydration, and the inescapable stench of death. The Seabee William Taylor Stitt represented the essential logistical backbone, quietly fighting the snipers while rebuilding the infrastructure necessary to win the long war. These individual stories, housed in the oral histories of the survivors, validate the historical records of the extreme operational complexity and the heavy casualty toll. They demonstrate how critical coordination, from the UDT frogmen blasting coral ramps to the precise execution of the 5-line amphibious staging plan, was even to gain a foothold on the island. They also confirm that, beyond the initial strategic objective, the defining characteristics of Peleliu were the environmental hostility, the deadly coral and extreme heat, and the effectiveness of the Japanese cave defenses. The lasting reflections on Peleliu focus on the concept of maximum human commitment. It is the place that earned the grim distinction of being considered worse than hell by those who fought there. Yet it is also a place where the simple human desire for survival and a return to normalcy inspired enduring legacies, such as the vow to invent a coffee machine, symbolizing the hope for a quiet, civilian future that defined the soldiers' struggle. The island's status as a National Historic Landmark serves as a permanent memorial, urging continued reflection on the costs of war and the unwavering resilience of the forces who transformed a small, insignificant island into a massive historical significance.